So my name is Freddy Cisneros, and I'm a graduate student at the University of Michigan in the Applied Physics program, where I work with the Jordan Horowitz group in biophysics. And my research comprises of both theoretical and computational research. So the path that I took to get to where I am was I think it was a bit of wanting to pursue a certain path, but at the time, I think there was a lot of barriers that I had to face. I wasn't able to get into the research groups that I wanted to, and so then I had to go through a different path and find another research topic that I was interested in, and I eventually got to the path that I am. So initially, what I wanted to do was astrophysics, but the barrier that I found there, or I just kind of like grew out of interest in that. Like I it didn't interest me so much at a certain point, and then I wanted to do particle physics, which is the physics of particles. And yeah, like I wasn't able to get into some of the groups that I wanted to work on at the time. So I decided to go into condensed matter physics, which is the physics of matter, like solids, liquids. And when I when I tried joining research groups there, a lot of them weren't taking undergraduate students because at the time I wanted to do this research as an undergraduate, but yeah, they were just taking postdocs and graduate students, so I wasn't able to join. Then when I became a graduate student, I wasn't able to join some of these groups because, because of lack of funding or what other reasons. Eventually, I got interested in biophysics. So I applied to the University of Michigan and did apply to a program where I could do the physics of biological systems. And that's what led me to the applied physics program, because I'm able to apply physics to biology and biophysics. So as I mentioned, my research is both theoretical and computational. So when I'm doing theoretical work, like I begin my project with, I begin working with my professor who I'm currently working with. And, he would like to understand a certain thing in nature. So he's like, hey, Freddie, can you go and investigate this topic, look into it. And in particular, I want to know why this happens, and in biophysics. And so I would have to go independently go and look through books, look through research papers, and try to, like get some understanding of the problem that he asked me to solve. And this can take a lot of time. Like it could take weeks, months, and then you have to try to understand the physics. Like how can you apply the physics that you know? And if you don't know that physics, how can you learn it? So sometimes you have to take classes, so that you could um, learn how to attack the problem. And so I think a bad day is that I don't yet have the tools. So I have to look for the tools. So I have to go read a lot of research papers, read a lot of books. Um, and and I may still not know how to solve that problem. So like a bad day is just when I don't have an idea on how to solve it, but eventually, things will click. And yeah, that'll be a bad day when I'm doing theoretical work. Computational work um, refers to writing code so that I can perform like a computational experiment. So similar to what experimentalists do on in a laboratory. I do something similar, but in a computational setting. Like instead of I perform a similar experiment, but like inside my computer. And so uh, a bad day would be one where the code isn't working, and it may take weeks, months, to write really good code that works and is working the way that it needs to be. So that's a bad day when it's not working and I don't know where the code like is failing because I write like hundreds of lines of code. So, but a good day is when it is working and everything is working like really nice. I see nice plots and I understand what's going on. I work about 12 hours in my in my office. So since I don't have a lab, um, I have the luxury, since my work is theoretical and computational, I have the luxury of, like taking my lab with me. So I can just take a notebook with me, like in my backpack, and I'm able to go like wherever, like to a cafe, out to the park, to the beach, wherever, and work from there on. But yeah, like I spend on average about 12 hours since I working on the stuff that I do, since I'm really interested in, like, I often have like a lot of problems that I still haven't solved, like in my research. So it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of concentration. Often like I'll I'll start my day and then I'll stumble on a problem like right away. And so I'll have to ride my bike, or I'll have to go skateboarding, or I'll have to go take a walk. That'll be like 3 hours, 4 hours. And then I'll come back to it. And then maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't. And so I'll just spend like, maybe I'll try to work on another problem that I'm trying to understand. And, but because of all that, like all that transitioning, all that thinking, all of this, like trying to figure that stuff out, it takes a really long time. So unfortunately, because I'm still trying to like understand like the problems that I'm working on, it takes 12, but I'm trying to like work 8 hours a day. So what gets me excited about my research is that the work that I do is relevant to biology. So a lot of, and chemistry, a lot of the life sciences. So it's really, I find that it's really awesome to be a physicist and be able to work with biologists and chemists, or do work that they can use like sometime in the future. Because like when I was younger, I wanted to be a doctor but like things didn't work out, and eventually I decided to become a physicist. But like often physicists like get disconnected from like like from the world, like in reality. And so it's pretty cool to like be able to like somehow go back to like caring for people, because like if the research that I do goes to biophysics, that could eventually, like, let's say, lead to the cure for cancer or something like that. That's really awesome. And so like that makes me want to work harder, so that like people, like, since the work that since biologists are kind of depending on my work, like it makes me want to do a really good job. It's also like really interesting questions that I'm working on, and it's a lot of stuff that I don't know. And it's like I always like solving, like learning new things. And so that's what gets me really like curious and motivated to do the research that I am. And that's why like I'm able to do like 12 hours and not really mind it, you know. Yeah, I think that the biggest struggle that I faced was when I first applied to my first graduate program. I applied to University of Maryland, and I was there for the PhD program, and I eventually transferred. I finished my master's, and then I came to the University of Michigan. But I think one of the biggest difficulties that I faced there was, getting like rejected so much by like all these different groups. So I went there highly motivated to go work with certain researchers. But um, I felt, yeah, when I approached them to try to work with them, like either there was times that we just weren't clicking. A professor may or may not take you on, depending on like the the chemistry between you and them. Because you have to keep in mind that during a PhD program in physics, it takes about five to 6 years. So does this professor really want to work with you, like, or want to put up with you for 5 to 6 years? And so like some professors, yeah, we just weren't clicking. And so I think that's one of the reasons why they didn't take me on. Other times it was just like funding and all these things. But I think at that time, like I wasn't doing too well in my courses because I was also trying to get into all these groups. I was approaching like a lot of groups, but I was getting a lot of rejections. So I think at that time it was one of the toughest times for me, because just getting so many rejections and like, you know, wondering like, dang, am I good enough? Like, you know, am I a good enough graduate student to, you know, to be here? And so like I had all these thoughts in my, you know, like in my mind. And yeah, so I think to me that was one of the biggest struggles, you know, like yeah, like just moving ahead and just continuing to like work hard and knowing that eventually somebody will take you on. So I think that was the one of the biggest struggles that I face in my academics. Since my work is, you know, it travels with me, um, I think I haven't been affected as much as people that have to go into labs and do the experiments, but it has affected me in the sense that all my classes are online. So all my research is online. Or all my research is here in my office, in my home. So I don't really go out to the university and interact with people, interact with my group. Um, so because of that, like I don't interact with members of my group. So before COVID, I had my group had an office space, and there was many cubicles with three other research members, and then the professor that I worked for like worked across from us. So anytime that I had a question, I could either ask the graduate students or the postdoc, or I could ask my professor who was right across the hall. And so because they're not so close that I could just, you know, like look over the cubicle and ask them a question, I have to kind of, you know, like I have to write my question like in an email or in a message that I can send to them. So there's that barrier that, you know, it reduces the amount of communication. And so I think it's affected me because like now I have to take a lot of time to write emails, you know, like to um, try to let them know like what my problem is so that they could kind of help me on it. And so yeah, there's just that barrier between like in communication. So I think it's affected it a bit that way. But I think one of the greater things is just, you know, I think it's healthy to interact with other people, to communicate, you know. And so not having that, I think it's another thing that kind of like that has affected me. And I think that's probably the thing that's affected me the most. One of the projects that I'm currently working on has to do with studying active matter systems. So active matter systems are systems where the particles, you know, they'll go in straight motions, or they'll like, you know, they'll periodically change their direction. But once they collide with another one, like with another particle, they could either, you know, they could either just like just meet and just, you know, like just press against each other. So, or, you know, they could just deviate their motion. So like this particle like might be going in a straight direction, but then this particle comes along and then it collides it. So like this one will continue going in the straight path, but it'll be shifted, you know. So in these systems, what you often see if you have enough of these particles is that you'll see these clusters form. So when these clusters form, they'll just aggregate more particles. You know, more particles will collide into these clusters and form larger clusters. But often, you know, particles would also leave these clusters. So you have, you know, just the cluster that keeps changing size and shape. And so the physics of these active matter systems is much different than the normal gas that you see. For instance, when, you know, you have a normal gas, like let's say when you have when the gas that you have inside a helium balloon, um, often what happens in that gas is that like there's a lot of particles in there. There's a lot of gas particles in there, but there's a lot of empty space between them. So what you'll often see is that these particles go in, in random directions, just colliding, and they'll collide with the container, with with the balloon. And then they'll, like, once they collide with the balloon, they'll start floating back, and they'll come back in the opposite direction. But these particles don't really interact with one another. So often what you see, the motion that these particles have inside the balloon is similar to what's going on inside this piston, is that they'll just go through random motion and they won't interact with one another. So the physics of this type of gases, which is known as an ideal gas, it's well understood. We know the physics of it, how the motion of these particles, like depending on how fast they're moving, how does that lead to pressure? How does that lead to temperature? How can that change the volume of the container? That's well understood. We know the physics of it, but we don't quite know the physics of these active matter systems. So one of the things that, where is it? Yeah, so one of the ways that, the thing that we want to do with these active matter systems is understand the physics, because we don't quite understand how this can lead to temperature or notions of temperature or pressure, or how can this change the volume, because these are much different than the gas that I showed you before, or the gas that's inside the balloon. But this can be something that we can represent as cells aggregating inside the body. Let's say that this can, I don't know, I'm still learning biology, but this might lead to, like blood clots or something like that. So understanding if cells that lead to blood clots can be represented as active matter, then it's very instrumental or it's very important that we understand active matter, so that we can understand how blood clots form, and so that we can reduce the formation of blood clots. And so I'm actually going to be working with the group in France as part of my Fulbright fellowship to understand the physics of these active matter systems. And so this is really interesting research, because physicists don't really understand too much about this. So there's many questions. There's a lot to learn about these systems. So, which makes it even more attractive.